Hi guys! This session I'll be talking to you about our framing options for when you're creating your own projects with resin and timber. I'll be going through a few different framing options for you, but it allows you to give variety with your projects, fill these timber cavities with resins and create different size pieces. So to start with today, I've got with me a silicone mould. When I ordered this one, I expected the side walls of the silicone mould to be a little bit thicker, which means I'd have a lot more support. I'm going to be putting in a 600 diameter piece of timber in this one and filling it up with resin. So with that weight of the resin, filling it quite high to the top, I'm going to get some flex in the sides. Now, silicone moulds can be great for some smaller jobs, but when you do get to your larger jobs, like I said before, the weight from the resin means that you do get some warpage with your moulds. So I didn't return it. I thought I would still use this mould and try firm up the sides before I was going to use it. So I'll show you some methods on how you can do that. Now, your local hardware stores should have something along the lines of garden edging. I found this particular flexible product in the plastering section. So I'm actually going to wrap this around the outside of my silicone mould a couple of times, and then I'm going to tape it down with some laminate tape, which has got a little bit more rigidity to it. So that way it'll help support my silicone frame when I do fill it up. So I have about 3 lengths of this. Because this still has a little bit of flex to it, I want to wrap it around 3 times to give it a little bit of support. Now with a little bit of my tape, I'll break it apart and hold it in position. I'm just tucking it back in on the inside. So that way I've held my join there. Now I'm going to wrap it around the entire framework and fold it back in on itself. And that way I've got a nice support here. So that way we don't have as much flex with our silicone mould. Okay. So I know both this material and my tape won't basically stick to the resin, but I also have my silicone frame here too. So if I know I fill up a little bit too high or some leaks over the edge, I know that both are going to release really well from my project today. Now there are other products that you can actually use to give some more support if you're in these circumstances, and things like a solid garden edging can be. You do have to make sure that you adhere the join very well so you've got that support as well. So now that I've got this quite firm, it does give me the opportunity to put any timber in here that I'll be using. For instance, this nice circular cut round piece. So it comes down to your personal taste as to what you'd like to create with it, whether it's a resin and timber project or resin alone or resin if you're embedding anything into it. So we'll move on to our next step of other options of framing up. Okay. This is our next framing option, and this is probably one of my most preferred. With this particular option of framing, you do have the ability to scale it to size of your project piece. So I can either do something that's serving board size, or you can use the same methods up to coffee table size, dining table size. So it's a really flexible option to create different shaped projects. Now I have a piece of pre-cut camphor laurel timber here, and I want to be able to fill out this front edge with resin. What product I'm using here is a Concreter's Form Ply. Now with this Concreter's Form Ply, it is a particular brand. This one's 4M Ply, and there's another brand, Carter Holt Harvey. These brands, the black coating that they use to usually release from concrete releases extremely well from resin. Now there are some Concreter's Form Plies out there that doesn't release extremely well, so it's something that I highly recommend testing. And testing involves mixing a small batch of your resin, pouring a tiny bit on a corner pocket of your test piece and letting it cure. Depending on the resin that you use, if it's Resi clear, it's a 24-hour cure time. Do not try to pull it off before that time frame, but you can basically try pick it off. If it releases very well, then you've got excellent form ply to be able to use for your resin projects. If it doesn't release and you've purchased a nice flat board, the other option is to cover it with clear packing tape. So clear packing tape releases really well from your project. So if you feel like you don't want to waste anything that's a solid board, then clear packing tape is the way to go. I know this particular form ply releases extremely well, so I'm going to move on to the next step. We're going to put up our side walls. Now we've also cut the side strips out of the same form ply. So I basically sit them on my board, and they're all pre-cut to size. And all I want to do is sit them against my board. When I've got everything squared up and I'm happy with the layout, I don't need to add silicone, I don't need to add screws, I don't need to add anything else in here except for a little bit of resin. Now, this is our Resi Clear. It's a 2:1 epoxy ratio. I pre-mixed this one using our ratio cups here. And I'm only going to pour a little bit into the front cavity. The aim of pouring a little bit in is to have it seep under the edge of the timber, to have it seep under the joins of my side strips. And by doing that, once that resin cures, it acts like a glue. So I need nothing else to bond and join my job together. If you have quite porous timber, I recommend repeating this process a second time, so doing 2 seal ups, and that way you know you've got a watertight cavity, you've also got timber that won't release any oxygen into your resin pore in that cavity when you do fill it up. So I'm going to put on some gloves and then I'm going to pour into the cavity. So I only need a really small amount of resin to seal this up. I only want it to be a mil or so layer. So I'm just pouring down the edge of the timber, and I will also pour down the join, just a little bit, and I will also pour down the back of the board where the edge strip here meets the edge of my timber. Now once I've done that, I will literally get my hand in here and make sure I've got good coverage over the edge of my timber. And because I've only poured a small amount of resin in, I'm not concerned about it flowing away or moving away too much. I want to make sure that the end strips have a little coating of resin so that way they attach to one another. And even a little bit along the base of my end strip as well, just in case it doesn't seep through. Pour a tiny little bit more on in my cavity. And I'm just making sure I've got that coverage on the bottom. And then I'll pop my strip back in place. Realign my side strips. Make sure everything's square. Pour a tiny little bit more into my cavity, so I've just covered the base of it. Making sure I've got good coverage along my edge strip there. And back up into the back. Just running it a little bit along the lips of the side strips. And then I sit and let this one cure for 24 hours before touching it again. And like I mentioned earlier, if you do have porous timber, you're unsure of your bond here, make sure you do 2 seal up coats. One other tiny little tip that I like to do just to make sure my edges stay attached is I use a little bit of masking tape just to hold them in place. As the resin cures, it's before it gets to the stage of tacking off, it is quite fluid. So there's a chance that some of it can seep under my timber or under the side strips, and it can actually warp and they can meander over the baseboard. So to keep them in place a little bit more securely, I just hold a little bit of masking tape around the side strips. So I'll just get some of that now. So just popping a little bit of that tape on, and that helps me join my pieces together. And this process is only to stop them from moving. I do recommend coming back as the resin starts to thicken up and just making sure everything is still in place. And then we'll leave that sit for 24 hours. Now let's go on to another piece, and an option for framing up if you don't have something that's pre-cut. Okay, this particular framing method works best when you have different shaped pieces of timber. but you haven't decided on the final cut and the final shape. So it means I can't actually use a solid end strip across to contain my resin. So what I'm actually going to do is use masking tape. Now with this particular piece, I want to fill in between my 3 pieces of timber with resin. So what I'm going to be doing is I've roughly laid them out in position where I want, and I'm going to be putting some masking tape on the back edges of these timber pieces. Now I'm just going to fold my tape in half. I'm going to stick it to the baseboard. Make sure I've got adhesion there. Then I'm going to push it onto the edge of the timber. Now this creates a little tape dam wall, so to speak. And I'm going to do that all along, folding it in half, making sure it's stuck down to my baseboard, and then adhering to the end of my timber. I'm going to do it on the front side too, so that way the 2 rivers that I'll be pouring have a containment area with the tape. When I'm working with unique timber types, this is actually my preferred method, because I like to come in afterwards and shape my boards that I'm making after I see where the resin settles, and cut it all back and then sand from that point. So this is just a quick method to get you started without having to do all the cutting and sawing first. So I'm happy where everything is adhered to. I'm just over the height of the timber. If you aren't, you can add an additional bit of tape and build your wall up a little bit higher if you're concerned that the tape wall might be a little bit low. Okay, so I've got my gloves on, I've got my pre-mixed Resi clear, and I'm going to pour a little bit in each of these channels. Then I'll be spreading it around with my hands in the resin with my gloves on. And I'm going to push it up against the tape. And by pushing it up against the tape, I might have the tiniest bit of leakage, but as that cures, it hardens, and then that creates my watertight containment area. If I had a deeper piece of timber, I would probably start by doing my first seal up layer with the resin and pushing it up against the tape, letting that dry, then adding an additional piece higher, because at this point, after letting the first layer dry, this tape becomes firm because the resin has made it go hard. So I want to push my resin up my tape and onto the sides of my timber pieces. So that way I'm creating a watertight frame area as soon as this resin cures. And I make sure I got good coverage. There isn't really a limit to how high you could take it, as long as it's got support against your timber edge piece, and you are ensuring with each seal up layer that you're coating the edge of the tape with the resin, and ensuring that it is actually curing properly in between each additional layer that you're adding. And I'm making sure I'm not pushing too hard on the tape too. I don't want the tape to come off at this stage. Not because I'm going to have resin leak, but if I end up with the wet ends of the timber and try to put tape back on, it'll be really difficult with resin in this channel here to actually adhere the tape back on. I'm just making sure I'm going up over that lip, making sure the inner wall of my tape is covered with the resin as well as the inner wall of my natural edge of my timber here. Spreading it all around nice and evenly. Making sure anywhere I'm going to be filling with resin in these channels is sealed up with this sealer layer of resin. And I'm just ever so slightly coating the top edge of my timber. And the only reason I'm doing that at the moment is because I might not get back to this piece to do a second seal up for a little bit, and I just want to make sure that I don't have the option of having my timber have moisture coming through the top side and not being able to release out the bottom side because I've secured it to the frame here. If that does happen, I have the chance of risking my timber warping, which I don't want to happen. So I want to seal it in nicely on the top surface. And once again, just making sure I have covered all those corners and those joins and where all my tape is sitting. And then I'll just give it, because I've been running my hands backwards and forth through the resin, I want to give it a nice mist with isopropyl. That way I can pop all the bubbles that I've created from moving my hands around. And then we will let this piece sit here and cure for 24 hours. I will come back and check on it and make sure I don't have any bubbles around the edges of the timber, and if I do, I will give it a mist with isopropyl. But aside from that, I let it cure for 24 hours, and I will probably give it a second seal as well, just to ensure that my tape has adhered and that I don't have any areas that can leak. And then after that, we can actually fill these cavities here and create our custom project. I hope you guys have enjoyed our different framing up options today. If you do have any questions about what we've gone through today or what some of the products are, please feel free to leave a comment, and make sure you follow us on all of our socials, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.